talk about tonight is the implementation and evaluation assignments, the last two. The good news is, if you're familiar with evaluations and implementations, they're rather easy assignments. And by now, through all that you've been through in the program, you should have a very good understanding of implementation and evaluation. But we're going to talk about what it means for this particular project here and what needs to be done. So why did I take the time to say that? I took the time to say that because concentrate, if you have not turned it in yet, concentrate on those areas where you're out there collecting data. And you have to fill in that information in the template in those particular areas where you need to make a determination on how each score weighs out. And that may, again, take you a little time. So this implementation and evaluation, frankly, it's, I think, 2 or 3 pages for the implementation, 2 or 3 pages for the evaluation. You should be able, after we discuss what we're going to discuss this evening, you should be able to sit down in one afternoon, or less than one afternoon, and jot out both assignments. So I'm not particularly concerned about those, but you do need to get those turned in prior to turning in that ARP. Once you reach the best alternative, you're saying this is the best way to go about dealing with this particular problem that I've addressed in my problem statement. So the logical course of action for any CEO, for any administrator, is going to be to do what? I've gone through all this problem to study this so that we can move forward with a solution to this. So now that we have the best way to go, what do you think we should do? Implement. Implement, A+. Implement means what?
Get going, started.
Get going, I like it. Put it into action. Make it happen. So in the implementation stage, we have broken it down to 3 specific areas. These 3 areas you want to discuss. I believe you're given 2 or 3 pages to address this in a template. If it's 3 pages, then 1 page for each area. If it's 2, then 2/3 of a page for each area. So either 600 or 900 words for, I'm sorry, there's 300 words per page. So either 200 or 300 words for each of these particular items that I'm about to talk about. Now, because you have the PowerPoint presentation sheet, we should be able to have a rather good discussion on this and be ready to roll. Kyle, what's the very first thing we should do if we're going to implement something? Okay. You were reading. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Policy format and distribution.
Pardon me?
Is it a policy format?
You're a CEO of an organization. You've now come up to something you want to do in this organization. So in order to do that, you're going to have a policy and a procedure for doing this particular thing. So we have to develop a policy and a procedure for going about implementing this particular best alternative. I don't know what your best alternative is going to be, but you're going to talk about how you're going to develop that policy and how you're going to develop that procedure. I don't know, again, what it may be, but you know, because one of you were already there. And you're going to want to talk about what does my policy have to be for this best alternative, and what procedure do I want to go about putting in this policy and procedure to make it effective within this organization. The second thing that I want to do in the implementation stage, now that I have a policy and procedure, what do I want to do as the CEO of the organization? I've now put the policy out. The policy/procedure. Policy is the rule, procedure is how to do the rule. It's all policy and procedure. But now that I've distributed to the staff or to the organization, the next thing I want to make sure is that we train the people that receive the policy and procedure on the policy and procedure, so that there's no question as to what needs to be done with this policy and procedure, so that it's not left to any individual interpretation as to what it might mean, so that everybody's singing out of the same hymn book, so that everybody understands it exactly the way it was meant to be understood. Now I can tell you this, after 40 years in the business, no matter how many times you do it, there'll be somebody that says, well, I didn't really hear it that way. So because there's this individual that says, and there always will be, I didn't hear it that way, what do you think the next step of the implementation is? Go back to what you said.
Method for determining understanding of policy.
All right. What we're saying is, I want something to ensure me, as the CEO of this organization, that everybody understood it the way it was supposed to be understood, so that all doubt is removed. In the training session, that's supposed to happen. But it doesn't always happen. At the end of the training session, there are always those who don't always understand it the way it was meant to be understood. So you have to have that follow-up to the training session to make sure everybody understands it the way it was supposed to be understood. That policy and procedure part, that first part's obviously going to have a date that you begin this and when it's going to go into effect, to make sure that everybody understands it the way that it was meant to be understood. You'll be discussing that in your paper, but I can tell you this, but this is sort of typical in organizations. There's this thing that says, I have read and understand, right? Well, don't turn that in for your number 3. Don't do it, because that's going to get you nowhere. Legally, that gets the CEO nowhere. So you're going to go, and this takes a little bit of research on your part. Not much, but a little bit. You look up policy implementation, you start to read about it a little bit, you start to see different means of policy implementation and the assurance that people did understand it the way it was meant to be understood, and what things are out there for you as a CEO to get that insurance that you need. Evaluation can be a little more complicated. Let's begin with this. I'm going to give you 2 words. Write them down or else memorize them. Formative and summative. When you do an evaluation, it's always nice to know when something began where I'm at. In other words, I just put out a new policy, so it's kind of nice to know how well the organization understands what it is this policy is supposed to be doing. Down the road, you want to know how well the organization has understood. That's the summative. In the beginning, you want the formative. And you want to be able to show that, yeah, they did get a hold of this policy and they were able to use it within the organization for whatever it was intended, for whatever its intended use was. How do we evaluate? It depends. Sometimes we can evaluate just by going out and asking questions. How's it going? How do you like this? Other times we have to go and we have to measure actual hard data. I don't know. This handout that I've given you goes into great detail about different evaluations, and you might want to look that through, because not all of you have the same alternative. Some of your alternatives are, even though we're using a comparative quantitative analysis, but some of your alternatives are actually more qualitative. And some are just hard numbers, quantitative. For example, the alternative might be the best way to deal with juvenile delinquency is, and you have four different ways to go about approaching juvenile behavior. Well, that's going to be a lot different to evaluate. That's going to be different to evaluate than if one of your alternatives was the least expensive method to repair patrol cars in order to save X amount of money in the operating cost in the budget. Well, in that particular one, what are you going to measure? Cost then, right at the moment now, formative, and cost summative. When? At the end of the evaluation period or down the road. And you're going to find out whether or not it was cost effective or not. That's just measuring hard numbers. The other one, where you're looking about a best way to go about dealing with people and how people feel about a certain thing, you have to go out and actually get that information from the people. How do we do that? Well, just like you went out and you asked folks, like the organizational folks or the political folks, how do you feel about this particular alternative? If it's a qualitative issue, like we're talking about with the juvenile delinquency alternatives, you know, is this best alternative? It may be how children can have a certain program with their parents to help prevent delinquency. And now you want to evaluate that. So obviously you need to go out and talk to the parents to, as the CEO of the organization, how well that worked for you in your juvenile crime prevention program, how well that particularly worked. Whereas if you're simply measuring a hard financial issue like the money spent on patrol car repairs, you just simply go to the books and you do the evaluation. So how long do we evaluate? There's a rule, and the rule is this. We evaluate summatively over 18 to 24 months. Formatively right away at the beginning of the implementation of the policy. But then after 18 to 24 months, we should have a pretty good idea how this is working or not working. You can do additional evaluations in between, but at the end of 18 to 24 months, you as the CEO of the organization have a pretty good idea. You have a pretty good idea if this program is going to hold water or not hold water. And why is that? I think all of you in here that work in government organizations or have been involved in some way or another with government organizations, you know that a policy and a procedure gets written based on an idea somebody had, based on somebody said this will come up, this will be the best way we can do this and whatever, and we're doing it. And we've been doing it now for 8, 9, 10 years, and somebody says, why do we do this? And somebody says, I don't know. Ever hear that? I don't know. Well, you know what the I don't know means? The I don't know means nobody ever evaluated it at any time ever to see if it was even worth keeping. You're the stewards of the public's money. You're the people in charge of making sure that money's spent righteously and spent in good fashion. So you owe it to the people that put you in the office where you're at, whether by appointment or whether by election, that you're coming up with the right answers to the right means. And part of coming up with the right answers to the right means is if I have a program that in this evaluation, that in this alternative thing, looked to be the best way to go, and now after 18 to 24 months is proving, after I put it into effect and we've collected the data on it, is not necessarily panning out the way we thought? Well, what does a good administrator do? There you go. And because, sometimes these reports, if you have them, farm them out, they're not very cheap. The beauty of it is, you've had 4 alternatives examined. It may be the next best alternative, might be the best way to go about solving this, and you may want to do that for a while and evaluate that. Or it may be you want to do a whole new thing, or it may be, as Samantha says, you just want to stop the whole thing. You don't know. But this we need to understand. If it's not working, we don't keep throwing good money after bad. That's not what we do as accountable, efficient, and rational public administrators.